With all of the recent news and hype surrounding Bleach, I wanted to go back and look at the final battle that occurs right at the end of the manga. Now, when Bleach had ended in August of 2016, a lot of people had issue with its ending. Some people enjoyed the final fight with Juha Bach, while others felt like it was rushed and some elements of it were contrived. Some were disappointed that there was no explanation as to what Ichigo's bankai was, and where the still silver arrowhead had originated from. If you follow this channel long enough, then you'll know that I've said this several times, that the ending of the 1000-year Blood War arc was rushed. We didn't get to see a proper battle between Uryu versus Haschwalth, and there were aspects of the final battle that just felt anticlimactic, and in the end it resulted in people feeling unsatisfied, as we didn't get to see the outcome of several characters after Juha Bach had been defeated. There was also a group of fans that were disappointed that Ichigo ended up with Orihime instead of Rukia. This isn't something that I'm going to be covering in this video. In this video, I just want to go through the final battle. I want to understand what Kubo was trying to do despite the immense pressure that was on him at this time, and not to mention the health issues that he was experiencing. So let's get into the topic of the video. This is my analysis and breakdown of the final battle of the 1000-year Blood War arc. The final battle of Bleach begins in chapter 683, but prior to this, Ichigo had encountered Juha Bach 2 other times. The first had been in chapter 513. There was no real outcome of that battle, but he had rematched Juha Bach in chapter 673. We know that Ichigo was defeated against Juha Bach in this encounter, but only 2 chapters after this rematch, Ichigo once again confronts the enemy. You can already tell that this ending was rushed, due to the length of time since their rematch and this final encounter. All of the build-up leading up to this final encounter occurs in chapter 682, so I'll begin my breakdown with that chapter. We see that Juha Bach has arrived in the Soul Society, as he meets Aizen, who iconically welcomes him to his Soul Society. Immediately after this, we see Uryu rushing to assist Ichigo, and it is here where his father and Isshin finally arrive and make an appearance during this arc, but their appearance is very short-lived, as they hand Uryu over the still silver arrowhead, and we get to learn the reasoning behind why this arrowhead is so effective against Juha Bach. The victims of Juha Bach's ability Ashwalen form a silver thrombus within their heart, and the arrowhead that has been given to Uryu has been made out of this silver thrombus. We get a small panel where Uryu remembers his father having dissected the body of his mother. He finally understands the procedure that his father was doing. His mother, being a victim of Ashwalen, had this very silver thrombus within her heart, so Ryuken, preparing for a future encounter with Juha Bach, had created this still silver arrowhead. In chapter 682, no explanation is given as to why this arrowhead is so important. We do find this out later on, but it would have been nice to have it explained here. Immediately you can tell how quick the pacing of the story is going, as we're going from one event to the other, not really having any time to settle in with characters that we haven't seen in 100 or so chapters. I mean, when was the last time that we had seen Ryuken and Isshin? We hardly get to see these characters before we cut away to Ichigo and Renji rushing over to the Soul Society. They have a very heartfelt moment, and I go over this in my Renji Ibarai character analysis video. Then halfway through the chapter, we cut back to the Soul Society. We see an enormous eruption as Juha Bach's Ryatsu erupts throughout the Soul Society. This not only destroys the nearby buildings, it also destroys the restraints that were keeping Aizen held down onto his chair. Aizen now declares that he is going to stop him, to which Juha Bach replies that he doesn't see how this benefits him. Why does Aizen want to help the Soul Society? Aizen justifies his reason for battling against the leader of the Quincy by stating that he wants to crush those who try to control him. This is the main reason that he is taking action, and you can see that this is in line with Aizen's character throughout the story. He had wanted to crush the Soul King because he didn't want to be ruled by a mindless, empty god. Before we get to see more banter between Aizen and Juha Bach, they are interrupted by the arrival of Ichigo and Renji. To be honest, I was loving this interaction between these two antagonistic forces, and I was really disappointed when this was cut short. And if we're going to get anything extended within the anime adaptation of this final arc, then I definitely want more interactions between Aizen and Juha. The leader of the Quincy tells them that he had foreseen this entire encounter, as we see a crack once again appear on Tensa Zangetsu. He attacks Ichigo with a burst of his Ryatsu and expresses how disappointed he is to see Ichigo in this condition. He tries to instill within them despair, as he states that there's not a single thing that they can change by being here. Fate has already been determined according to Juha, and Ichigo and the others are destined to lose here. Renji attempts to attack by using his bankai, but instead has his left arm severed. Immediately after this, Aizen goes in for an attack, as Juha Bach expresses his surprise to see Aizen protecting defeating Renji. One thing that I love about this final battle is Juha Bach's commentary on Aizen's behavior. He comments on how Aizen is working together with Ichigo and Renji. He continuously reminds Aizen of how his behavior is contradictory to his prior words, as he tells him that wasn't it him who had said that only losers work together in order to face off against a common enemy. It appears that Aizen is easily brushed off by Juha Bach, as he states that his Zanpakuto Kyoka has already broken, and that it isn't effective against him. When we suddenly turn the page, Ichigo appears but with his left arm severed. This is when Juha Bach commends Ichigo on quickly reacting to the situation and learning how to fight alongside Aizen. He tells them despite their efforts, Kyoka isn't a match against his power, and we get to understand why Ichigo's left arm is severed when he explains that when he had released his Ryatsu, it was Renji Ibarai who was blown away, not Ichigo, and it wasn't Renji who had attempted to then blindside Juha Bach, it was actually Ichigo. As I'm about to explain, we learn that Ichigo and Renji did not take part in any of these encounters. It was Aizen who had been using his Kyoka creating illusions of both Ichigo and Renji facing off against Juha Bach, thus proving that Juha Bach is susceptible to Aizen's Kyoka He then appears to activate his ability the Almighty and shatters Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu blade, and then immediately after declares that it is over. He then blows a hole through Ichigo's torso. It appears that he has defeated him as he bids farewell to Ichigo. Juha Bach then prepares to unleash his Ryatsu in order to destroy the Soul Society, but as we turn the page, Juha Bach is surprised to see that he has attacked Aizen instead of Ichigo. Aizen muses to himself that Juha Bach appears to see him as Ichigo, and then suddenly, as if by surprise, Ichigo impales Juha Bach from behind, and while impaled, he unleashes a Getsuga Tensho. At the start of chapter 684, Juha Bach stares into the eyes of Ichigo, as his body gradually dissolves into a puddle on the ground. Aizen compliments Ichigo on instantly reacting to his Kyoka Getsu, to which Ichigo states that he had felt something strange while making his way here to the Soul Society. It was a similar feeling to when Aizen had unleashed his Kyoka Getsu in everybody during the Fate Karakura Town arc. Aizen then reveals he had released his Zanpakuto prior to the arrival of Ichigo and Renji. This was because Aizen was convinced that he could interfere with the vision of Juha Bach's future thanks to using his Kyoka Getsu, and another key element to this plan that Aizen was banking on was that Ichigo would not be affected by his Kyoka Getsu. Aizen is surprised as he states that he didn't think that keeping Kyoka Getsu's release hidden from Ichigo would come in handy like this, but then just as Aizen says this, Juha Bach returns as he attacks Aizen. After returning and appearing in this very menacing form, he questions if Ichigo truly thought that he could kill him with a move like that. He reminds Ichigo that the power of the Almighty alters the future. He can even rewrite the future in which he dies. As Ichigo charges towards Juha Bach, he tells him not to bother, and it is at this point in the battle, during chapter 684, where things just appear to happen out of nowhere, and it really feels like pacing was a big issue here, and that Kubo just wanted to quickly wrap up the story. As Juha Bach unleashes his Ryatsu and he is about to engulf all of the living world, the Soul Society, and end existence as we know it, he is suddenly impaled through the heart by a still silver arrowhead that was fired by Uryu Ishida. We then get a very brief half-a-page explanation as to what this arrowhead is, as it appears that Ryuken is monologuing here to Uryu, as he explains that Soken Ishida had once told him that the silver that appears from Ashwalin is known as the Silver of Stillness. By mixing the still silver with the blood of the individual who had casted Ashwalin, then all of that individual's abilities will cease to exist, but only for a brief moment. As Juha Bach is stunned and he is unable to foresee into the future or to manipulate or change it, Ichigo takes advantage of the situation. He charges towards Juha Bach, who proclaims that it doesn't matter if they have halted his abilities for just a moment, they still have no chance to defeat him. Ichigo swings his Zanpakuto towards Juha Bach, who then once again attempts to break his Zanpakuto. It appears that he was successful. We see that Juha Bach was only successful in destroying the white portion of Ichigo's Zanpakuto. Underneath it, it reveals Ichigo's original Shikai Zanpakuto, as everything comes full circle. In his moment of defeat, Juha Bach realizes that the dream that Haschwalth had sent to him was in fact a vision of Juha Bach's future. We get a brief glimpse into this vision that Juha Bach had misunderstood as a dream, as we see Ichigo in his attire that he had worn during the Soul Society arc, and the original Shikai release of his Zanpakuto. As chapter 684 concludes, Juha Bach is defeated, and thus brings an end to the final battle of Bleach. A lot of people were confused here as to why Ichigo's old Shikai Zanpakuto had returned. Well, we know that when Orihime and Tsukishima had restored Ichigo's Zanpakuto, Orihime had used her powers of rejection, and Tsukishima had used his Book of End ability in order to create a past where Ichigo's Zanpakuto was not broken by Juha Bach. Together, they were able to restore Ichigo's Zanpakuto. We know that after Ichigo leaves Uetsu Nimaya's domain, Ichigo's Zanpakuto now represents both sides of his powers. One of his Zanpakuto blades sides represents his Quincy side, while the other represents his Shinigami and Hollow abilities. When Ichigo activates his bankai, we see a new form of Tensei Zangetsu, as we see that his two Zanpakuto merge into one giant blade. This blade consists of a smaller black blade, which forms the inner part of his Zanpakuto, and this black blade is surrounded by a outer white portion. When Juha Bach attempts to destroy Tensei Zangetsu for the second time, it just breaks the outer white portion, revealing a blade underneath which strikingly resembles Ichigo's original form of his shikai, what we all know as Zangetsu underneath. Now, the true ability of Ichigo's bankai is unknown, but we know that Juha Bach was well aware of it, and it is for this reason that he had immediately destroyed Ichigo's Zanpakuto right after it was activated during their battle, and it is for this reason that myself and others have begun to speculate that the true ability of Ichigo's bankai is the power to change fate, and this is in line with the theme of challenging fate, which is heavily linked to the character of Ichigo, as throughout the series he defies the odds and challenges fate, whether if this is to go against fate in order to rescue Rukia, to overcome the odds in order to defeat Aizen, to climb out of despair in order to regain his Shinigami powers during the Fullbring arc, or even now when he is up against an individual who can see into the future and can predict all outcomes. Ichigo was able to defy predetermined fate. Juha Bach, who had relied so heavily on fate, was defeated by Ichigo, who throughout the series has ridiculed this notion of predetermined fate and destiny, and it is for this reason that I believe that the true ability of Ichigo's bankai is to shatter fate. If you want more of an explanation into Ichigo's powers and how the theme of shattering fate is aligned with them, then check out my Ichigo Kurosaki character analysis video. In general, I have no problem with the characters that appear during this final battle and the roles that they play. Logically, everything appears to make sense. The only thing that feels lacking is that everything occurs so quickly. Kubo leaves himself with no time to foreshadow the events that are about to occur, or go into any of the build-up leading up to it. After going through the entirety of this final battle, we are aware that several characters play key roles, which ultimately lead to the defeat of Juha Bach. I'm now going to go through the roles that each of these characters play. Let's start off with the actions of Ryuken. If it wasn't for him performing an autopsy on Uryu's mother, then we wouldn't have the still silver arrowhead. This silver was formed from the powers of Juha Bach himself, and thus it wouldn't work in anybody but Juha Bach. So if it wasn't for the quick thinking and actions of Ryuken, then we wouldn't have this weapon that was only effective on Juha Bach. Now let's go over the second character who plays a very vital role in defeating the end villain. Of course, I'm talking about the individual who had fired the arrowhead. If not for the actions of Uryu, then Juha Bach would not have been momentarily stopped. We know that Uryu was recognized by Juha Bach as the final surviving Quincy, and that he was unaffected by Juha Bach's Ashwalen. But why is this possible? We later learn that Uryu had a latent ability, and he was the only other Quincy, aside from Juha Bach, who was given a shrift with the letter A. Juha Bach's was the Almighty, while Uryu's was the Antithesis. So you could say that Uryu's latent Antithesis ability repelled Juha Bach's Ashwalen power. During Uryu's battle against Haschwalth, his enemy even admits that the Antithesis would be highly effective against the Almighty, because no matter what changes Juha Bach inflicts, Uryu would be able to reverse them. And thus, because of Uryu's Antithesis ability, he was able to fire the still silver arrowhead into Juha Bach without being concerned that it would have been prevented from landing on its target thanks to Juha Bach's almighty ability, because even if it did, Uryu would have been able to reverse it. So ultimately, he was the most fitting person to fire this arrowhead. But who can we thank for allowing Uryu to get close enough in order to take his shot? The individual that we credit for this is the third person who plays a vital role in the defeat of Juha Bach. This individual was recognized as one of the 5 Great Wall potentials, and this was because of his incredible Reiatsu. The third individual that I'm referring to is Sosuke Aizen, who had enough Reiatsu that he could repel the raw power of Juha Bach. From what I talked about earlier, we know that Kyokasuigetsu was effective against Juha Bach. This is because Aizen Zanpakuto creates visual illusions, and the way that Juha Bach looks into the future is through his eyes, so whatever he sees he believes to be real. So because his clairvoyance is vision based, Aizen was able to manipulate this, thanks to creating visual illusions. We know that his illusions were effective when he had convinced Juha Bach that he was fighting against Ichigo and Renji together, while in actual fact he was fighting Aizen on his own. It appears that Aizen was sidelined after Juha Bach had recovered from Ichigo's surprise attack, but what if we consider for a moment that Aizen was still using his Kyokasuigetsu off screen? Maybe this is something that Kubo didn't have enough time to place into the manga chapter. You could theorize that Aizen was still using his illusions in order to keep Juha Bach's enemies away from his sight, thus explaining how Juha Bach had only noticed Ichigo after he was attacked by him, and using the same logic he had kept Uryu away from his vision, explaining how Uryu was able to land a surprise attack against Juha Bach. This is just a theory, but it does explain how Juha Bach wasn't able to foresee Ichigo surprise attacking him or Uryu firing the arrowhead through him. Now let's go on to the role that Ichigo plays during this battle. Ichigo was dubbed as a first rank threat by the Quincy. We know that earlier his Quincy and Hollow powers had been taken away from him. After this, Juha Bach had confidently declared himself as the victor. He was so confident that he even got rid of the final few Stenritters. He had even gone to the Soul Society, leaving the path open for Ichigo and Renji to follow him. The biggest downfall for Juha Bach was that he was over-reliant on the Almighty. Juha Bach is aware that he loses his ability to see into the future whenever he sleeps. So when he had seen this vision of Ichigo cutting him down, he had believed it to just be a dream, because not too long after waking up, he was able to defeat Ichigo, destroy his Zanpakuto, and absorb his Quincy and Hollow abilities, reducing Ichigo to nothing but a Shinigami. This is what led to him becoming overconfident, and he had concluded that Ichigo was no longer a threat to him. This explains why Ichigo's Zanpakuto had returned to its original Shikai form in Juha Bach's vision. He was foretold that he was going to be defeated by a base form of Ichigo, one that would only have Shinigami abilities, reminiscent of the form that he had taken during the Soul Society arc. If Juha Bach had treated this vision seriously and not just as a nightmare, then he still would have treated Ichigo as a threat, even after absorbing his Quincy and Hollow abilities and reducing him down to only his Shinigami powers, because he was forewarned that he would be defeated by Ichigo in his base Shinigami form. For me, this explains why Ichigo's Zanpakuto appeared in its original Shikai form. When Ichigo's Tensar Zangetsu blade had shattered, it was no longer in the form that represented Ichigo's combined Quincy, Hollow, and Shinigami powers. Instead, it took the form of Ichigo's original Shikai, which as we know represents solely his Shinigami abilities, so thus cements Ichigo's role that he plays in defeating Juha Bach, which was ultimately in line with the vision that Juha Bach had ignored. So just before waking, why was it that Juha Bach had seen this vision? If he was going to be defeated and he was regaining the abilities of the Almighty, why didn't he see visions of his plans failing? Or a vision that his corpse would eventually become the basis for the new Soul King? Who was it that had placed this vision at the forefront of Juha Bach's mind? Then he would be defeated by Ichigo's original Shikai Zanpakuto. This perfectly now leads us to the final character who plays an instrumental part in defeating Juha Bach. It is theorized that this vision of base form Ichigo defeating Juha Bach was instilled into the mind of the leader of the Quincy by none other than his second in command, Haschwalth. We know that when Juha Bach is asleep, his other half, Haschwalth, gains the abilities of the Almighty. Haschwalth is only able to use the Almighty in order to see into the future. During his final time that he had the abilities of the Almighty, he had seen something which had made him work against Juha Bach for once. During the Can't For Your Own World light novels, it is revealed that Haschwalth had actually foresaw his and Juha Bach's deaths, and he was unable to find a future where this would be altered. In addition to this, he was also able to foresee a future that had threatened the survival of the Quincy. So in order to safeguard the Quincy race, Haschwalth had taken action prior to confronting Uryu. Thus, he allowed the events to unfold which would lead to the successful defeat of Juha Bach. And as a failsafe, he had also made sure that the first thing that Juha Bach had seen once he regained the abilities of the Almighty was a vision of him being defeated by Ichigo. If Juha Bach had paid attention to this, then he would have succeeded in his plans. But of course, his own hubris and arrogance led him not to. And the entire reason that he wasn't able to foresee that his corpse would become the new Soul King was that he dismissed the first event that would have led to this future. This first event is of course normal base form Ichigo delivering the final blow to him. In the end, Haschwalth never got to know if Juha Bach would have taken this vision seriously or not. The moment that he had decided to work against Juha Bach, he had already accepted that he would die at the hands of Ashwalin. Assuming that he was already going to be killed, he acted like a traitor to his leader in his final moments. Haschwalth worked against Juha Bach in the end because it was for the betterment of the Quincy race and for its long-term survival. And as we can see, all of these characters working together helps us to explain the final battle that occurs within Bleach, and helps us to better understand how Juha Bach was defeated. A lot of this is speculation and reading between the lines, and I do believe this would have been explained much better within the manga if only Kubo had time. As we know, after chapter 684, Juha Bach is defeated, and we immediately get an epilogue within the next chapter, which occurs 10 years after Juha Bach's defeat. We don't get to see any of the aftermath at the end of the 1000-year Blood War arc, and before we know it, we have chapter 686, where we see the Ryatsu of Juha Bach return, but he is easily subdued by the intervention of Kazui, who manages to prevent his revival from taking place. This is the headcanon that I have adopted in my own mind, mind which helps me to better understand this final battle, and I hope that some of it does prove to be true when the anime returns. If not, I would love to see what Kubo was really intending with this final battle, and I cannot wait for the conclusion of this arc to be adapted into the anime. What did you think about this explanation of the final battle that occurs within Bleach? Do you agree or disagree with this breakdown? I would love to read your thoughts about this final battle and your understanding of what actually occurs, so definitely leave a comment under this video and let's continue the discussion. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe and turn on the bell notifications, because I'm going to be making plenty of Bleach discussion videos just like this one, and I can't wait to see you in the next Bleach video. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.